All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So today we have Crazy Horse. So how many of you have been here? I figured a lot of well-traveled people today. Of course, before we can do Crazy Horse, I have to tell you what I forgot from last week. So Frederick Douglass described his last owner as a man who was probably the worst of masters, the worst type of slave owner, according to many former slaves, including him. He was a very mean man in the sense that he didn't really care about your feelings or your well-being in any sense. Kept him hungry all the time, always felt like he was starving. But he was a mean man and a weak man. He was the type of man who demanded things but didn't carry the air of authority that would make you respect him in any manner. And for Douglass, that was the worst. He wanted Douglass and his other slaves to call him master, and Douglass would not. Neither would any of the other slaves he owned. They would call him Captain Auld, and really didn't even want to call him captain. And so he would throw a fit of anger and yell and scream, but at heart, he was a spineless, weak sort of man. And for Douglass, that was like the worst, because he endured many punishments because of his disrespect to his owner, but he didn't care. He was not going to respect someone who never commanded any kind of authority over him, despite the fact that he was his owner. So that was what I left out from last week. So, Crazy Horse. One of the unfortunate things we know about Crazy Horse was that he did not ever want to be photographed. It was something that he believed would in some way shorten his life or take his soul in some sort of way. And so this great monument here, we don't know what Crazy Horse looks like, but that's about as good as you're going to get, except for the fact that Crazy Horse had a large scar on the left side of his face, right underneath his nose. That statue is not going to reflect that, because we don't really know exactly how the scar played out, what it exactly looked like. So I think they just kind of left it out altogether.
Where is that?
This is right by Mount Rushmore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not too far away.
Do you know when it was carved?
It's not
So,
finished.
yeah.
They've been working on it for over 50 years. It'll be another 50 years before they finish.
Yeah, this is a very long, slow process that has been going on for a long time and will be going on for a long time to come. I'll show you at the end what it's supposed to look like when it's done.
Why is it taking so long?
It is absolutely huge. It is incredibly massive. And I think the resources are somewhat limited.
Privately funded?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, there are people standing here. They're just tiny little dots. This is an incredibly massive monument. So, our bibliography. There are a number of very good books on Crazy Horse. Unfortunately, a lot of it is more imagination and hearsay and background information rather than directly on Crazy Horse himself. We know really very little about most of his life. Almost everything that we know about Crazy Horse we know about the last year or so of his life. The rest of it is very, very spotty. And this first book, Larry Mccurdy, Crazy Horse, 148 pages. This is one of my favorites, actually, because the guy is very realistic as to Crazy Horse information. In the first couple of chapters of this book, he describes the difficulty of writing about Crazy Horse, and the several books that have, very good books that have been written about him, are largely a filler. We know a lot about the Sioux, the Lakota, the Indians of which he was a member, but of him we know very little. And so he's very realistic in that sense that you may have read other books about Crazy Horse, but you're still not going to know a lot about him, except the last year or so of his life. This next one is a very interesting book. Mary Sandaws, she wrote several books on the Native Americans, and she got a lot of her information, this is back in the 1940s, through interviews that she had personally with surviving members of the Sioux tribe who knew Crazy Horse. And so in that sense, she's a very good historian. On the other hand, this book in and of itself is supposedly from Crazy Horse's perspective, and that's how she was writing this book. For me, it was kind of difficult reading, because I'm the type of person who wants to know when something happened and then how long after that did something else happen. I'm very linear, I'm very date-oriented, and there are no dates in here because Crazy Horse didn't know the year or the month or anything like that. And so she describes things that happened, and unless you really know the story of Crazy Horse and when various things happened and about various battles, because if he's in a particular battle, she isn't going to name this is the battle of, because it wasn't named yet. So it's kind of hard to follow, at least for me anyway. But it's a very good story. It's really more historical fiction than history, but it's still very good. It's a highly rated book by people who know the story. This next one, Joseph M. Marshall III, The Journey of Crazy Horse, 310 pages. This is a guy who's very well educated, a very good writer, also a Sioux Indian himself. And so he mixes his scholarship with the oral traditions of the Native Americans. And for those of you who know my stance on oral traditions, you know that I don't really go by that. I do not believe that oral traditions are in any way accurate. And so for me, it's a mixed bag. He's a good writer. It's entertaining reading, but it comes off for me a bit just not accurate. My thing about oral traditions, one of the reasons that we know that oral traditions cannot be accurate is that you cannot get two books that both say that they are oral traditions to agree with one another. One book that may stand very firmly on their oral traditions will give you a story. Another book, again, that will tell you that they follow the oral traditions will tell you another story, and they're both about the same topic. So anyway, the next one, Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard, Killing Crazy Horse, The Merciless Indian Wars of America. This book is not specifically about Crazy Horse. It's about like the title says, the Indian Wars in general. So it covers lots of different battles and different Native Americans. But in the end, it focuses on Crazy Horse. For some people, Bill O'Reilly is a very good writer. He's entertaining to read. For me, he's sometimes entertaining, but as a historian, and so his Martin Dugard is the guy who does the research, and Bill O'Reilly does the writing. Martin Dugard, I suppose, is a very well educated man. There are a few things that in this book that I find a bit questionable as the history that he writes in some instances I think are not accurate. But it's fairly entertaining reading. D. Brown, after many, many years of seeing this book in used bookstores and thinking, yeah, I'll get it someday. I know it's a very popular book. I finally got it and read it. And again, this is, I'm kind of surprised that I did not hate this book. I was expecting to hate this book. This was written in 1970, and it made a big splash back then as the book that's showing the other side of history. This is history from the Native American viewpoint. And I've read other books like that I did not like at all, because they come across sometimes as being very superior. The Native American ways are the good ways. The white people are the bad people. And that's kind of the story, how the story goes. And D. Brown, interestingly enough, is not Native American. He went by the oral traditions in addition to modern scholarship, and puts his stories together in that way. So again, this is kind of like the Bill O'Reilly book. It's not just focused on one instance. It's the Native American wars of the late 1800s is basically what he focuses on. So again, I didn't hate it. It's very well written, but to me, it comes across as, yeah, the Indians are superior and white people are inferior to them, culturally speaking. And so, yeah, that kind of messes with me. I do not like to see or read books with that kind of a bias, nor would I enjoy a book that presented white people as superior to Native Americans. I really do enjoy books that are scholarly and do not try to present one side as better than the other. The next one, Stephen Ambrose, Crazy Horse and Custer. As far as pure enjoyment of reading, you can't beat Stephen Ambrose. He's just a great writer, and he's written who knows how many books on history, and I've read a number of his works. He's always very entertaining to read. Some of his conclusions are disputed. He's not known as a great scholar as much as just a very good popular historian. And then this last one, Thomas Powers, The Killing of Crazy Horse, 568 pages. This one is well worth reading. At 568 pages, you know that this is a lot more than just Crazy Horse. What he does is concentrate on many different people involved in the various aspects of the Indian Wars, and you'll learn a lot about characters that you didn't know much of beforehand. So If you want to get a really big, full picture of course, the great climax of the Battle of Little Bighorn, he talks a lot about many different characters involved in that.
Question.
Yes?
I'm always impressed with how many books you've read. When you begin to cite lectures or decide on lectures, have you already read all these books, or do you read them between when you start and when you finish a lecture? Or how do you prepare all this information?
Well, over the many years that I have enjoyed reading history, some of these books will have been books that I have read years ago, and some of them just more recently. So probably more often than not, they're books that I have read, like the various terms here that I teach, I have like 2 or 3 months of prep work before, and so I'll read mostly between those times. So I have 3 more weeks after this, and then I'll delve into my next series and get those books. Of course, this next one will be something that I have read several books on. I'll be doing colonial history next term, and I have a number of books that I've already read, but anyway. So, the early years of Crazy Horse. He was born 1840 or 1841, not really sure what. He's in Oglala, Lakota Sioux. His father and his grandfather's name was Crazy Horse. This is one of the more unusual incidences in which the son takes his father's name. Usually, for most Native Americans and the wide variety of very fascinating names that they have, it's usually because of an incident in their lives, something that they did, something that happened to them, and they take a name from that. Every so often, though, you have a man who is given the name from his father. And in this case, Crazy Horse's father was Crazy Horse, and his grandfather was Crazy Horse. He was a fairly light-skinned and light-haired young man. Something kind of unusual, but not unknown. His name early on was Curly, or light hair, depending on who you're reading. And he had a fairly slight build. He was medium height, and he was known very early on as a loner. He loved to go off by himself. And this, as a young man, kind of unusual, as Native Americans are generally people who were not loners. They lived together communally, of course, and went off into the wilderness in groups. Very rarely would you find a Native American by themselves. Crazy Horse was unusual in that sense. Every young man who aspired to be a great warrior or a great man in any sense had to have a vision. The way to get that vision was to go through the sun dance, which was an ordeal that not every young man had to go through. It was not a requirement, but if you were really going to have your vision, you were to do this. And it involved fasting, it involved some sort of torturous cutting on yourself. The sun ritual, there was a tall pole and a leather strap that you would attach your chest to, and you would stand out in the sun, facing the sun, for hours and sometimes days before you got your vision. There's other ways of getting your vision as well. Sometimes it's in the sweat lodge where you spend a day or more fasting and sweating, and that may give you your vision as well. Crazy Horse did not go through any of the normal rituals to get his vision. He went off by himself and fasted and had his vision of, and now this is one of the instances again where we're not sure exactly what the vision was, how it came across, but his vision was generally either he was riding on a horse or he saw some other man riding on a horse, and they were being shot at but never hit. He was going through a battle. And at the end of this vision, he was told that he was going to be different from the others. He was going to dress plainly. He was never going to show off various colorful outfits or put a big headdress on with feathers. And he was not to brag about his accomplishments. This is very unusual. Humility was not a virtue that was celebrated among the Plains tribes. When a young man achieved some sort of greatness in battle, it was expected that you brag about it. You tell about your great deeds of counting coup, killing your enemy, collecting scalps, or hunting for that matter. You were to brag about it. It was expected. Crazy Horse was not going to do that. He was told by his vision that he was never to collect anything for himself. He was never to brag about any of his accomplishments. He was to focus his life on helping his fellow Native Americans, helping the weak, and anything that he collected, whether it be horses or any kind of trophies, he was to give away. He was not to keep anything. Oh, and of course, the rituals that he would have for going out into battle beforehand, he was to throw dust on himself and his horse, preferably from a gopher hole that had been dug up, the dirt that the gopher digs up, but throwing dirt on himself and his horse, and he was to keep a pebble behind his ear. I think it was his left ear, although I'm not really sure on that, but there was a pebble to be kept behind his ear. And he was, again, to dress plainly. He wasn't very showy in his outfit when he went to war. So he was to be a simple man, and he would stand out because of that. So the irony, of course, is that because he was not going to be showy, he gathered more attention than he would have if he was. So, his first great outing as a warrior, he was about 16. They went on a raid against the Arapahoes. Several times, this young man rode into danger and killed 2 Arapahoes, took their scalps, although he knew he wasn't supposed to, and then he was injured in the leg. And of course, he attributes that to the fact that he took 2 scalps. Of course, he remembered afterwards. At that point, Light Hair, or Curly as he was known, becomes Crazy Horse. His father sees that he is worthy now of his name, and so the father, interestingly enough, has to give up that name and take another, now that his son is Crazy Horse, and of all things, he chooses the name Worm. I never really got a good explanation for why he thought that would be a good name to take, but his name afterwards is now Worm, and his son is Crazy Horse. And as he grows, he becomes more and more famous as a great warrior and a very selfless man, always giving to the needy, helping out widows, of which there are always plenty, because men die in battle. But he helps others out. And there was an organization within the Lakotas called the Shirt Wearers. The Shirt Wearers were hand-picked, very selected men who were to be, in a sense, the enforcers. They were to keep peace within the tribe. If there is an argument that breaks out, or if someone is being taken advantage of, if one strong person is picking on the weak, these shirt wearers were to intervene to make sure that no injustices occurred. They were to protect the weak. They were to help provide for widows, again. And they were to be above reproach in every sense of that term. They were not to be selfish. They were not to be arrogant. They were to always think of the others before themselves. And so Crazy Horse fit very nicely into this position, because that's the type of person he was, and everybody recognized it. And so he became a very honored shirt wearer to look out for the interests of others. And so he had the honor of wearing this war shirt. There are many pictures online that purport to be his particular war shirt, and they're most likely not. One of them actually has scalps attached to it, which he would never do. He was not a showy man, did not collect scalps. So his particular war shirt is probably lost to history, but this is an example of one. Yes?
That's not the same as the ghost shirt.
No, no. That whole ghost dance thing was much later. So, as I said before, any time you're reading a history or biography of Crazy Horse, a lot of what you're going to read is the background information as to what was going on between white people and Native Americans, the Lakotas in particular, at the time. So, at this time, gold had been discovered in the mid-1860s in Montana. And so there was a trail from that broke off from the Oregon Trail that led up to the gold fields in Montana. This was known as the Bozeman Trail. And it just happened to go through some of the best hunting lands that the Lakota had. And they were not happy about this. So to protect the miners and others going up to Montana, there were 3 forts that were built along the Bozeman Trail. And naturally, they became the lightning rods for the Native Americans who resented this. And they were constantly harassed, the men in the forts and the travelers going through this Bozeman Trail. And it all culminated in this horrific massacre. In December of 1866, these 3 forts, one of them had several soldiers in there to protect both the travelers and the woodcutters. Woodcutters had to go out frequently to chop wood and bring it back to the fort. And on this particular day, the woodcutters and the people in the fort didn't realize the natives were becoming more and more organized. The scattered attacks here and there, the natives were learning after each time. These, killing one or two woodcutters or a soldier here and there was not going to do it. They wanted to plan something great. They wanted to take an entire fort or the soldiers who went out to protect. And after some time of working on this, and this is something that Crazy Horse was instrumental in teaching his fellow natives, his fellow warriors, discipline, something that they did not generally have as a group. So Captain Fetterman takes 80 men out to protect these woodcutters who had been attacked. He was told not to go too far, not to go over the ridge. You go out, you help the woodcutters, and you come back. You drive off the Indians. Fetterman did not listen. He was sure that he was going to become famous killing a larger number of Indians and deal with them in a more decisive manner. Of course, he didn't realize that it was all a trap. Crazy Horse and 10 other men with him were just decoys, and they led him probably about 5 miles away from the fort, and most importantly over the ridge, so that the fort, people from the fort couldn't see what was going on. And it was a very skillful thing for Crazy Horse and the warriors with him to tantalize the soldiers, to stop and pretend like he's helping his horse who has an injured foot, stopping when he sees that the soldiers may not be following him. He and his compatriots they would stop and they would yell, or they would just do something to taunt the soldiers. And each mile they would go slowly, almost like a fisherman fishing for, using themselves as bait to draw on the soldiers. And it worked. The soldiers, for the most part, really should have known better. This is not the first time decoys have been used for an ambush, but Fetterman was probably too caught up in the glory that he thought was coming his way in killing a few Indians. So anyway, he went over the ridge like he was told not to. And once he got far enough, the trap was sprung. He could not escape. They came in from behind and wiped out all of his men and himself in this Fetterman massacre. Now, if you see pictures of this area, and of course I haven't been there, but the pictures that I've seen make it difficult to imagine how 2,000 Indians hid from him and then just jumped out and attacked and killed them all. As you can see, it's an open area, but apparently there's several draws and places to hide in amongst the kind of the crevices of the various rolling hills there. But this was an incredible shock to the U.S. Army, as you might imagine, and the blame went squarely onto Fetterman for his foolishness in trying to chase down these Indians and walk right into a trap that he should have known better. And then, not long afterwards, there was the wagon box fight. Just a few months later, into 1867, Crazy Horse and 1,000 of his Sioux warriors attack a very small group. They created an improvised fort some miles from the main fort to help the woodcutters again. And this time, however, they were well armed. The rifles that had been used had been, in the past, mostly muzzle loaders. And so you get off one shot and then it takes several seconds to reload and to shoot again. These men are now armed with Springfield breech loaders that can be shot much more quickly. So again, they attack some woodcutters, and with only 26 men, the soldiers fought off 1,000 Indians. It has been said that they could probably have taken this small group of men in their improvised fort if they would have attacked simultaneously at two sides, but they didn't. Crazy Horse, with all of his bravery, leading his men into battle, just got several of them killed, and then finally just called it off. And he realized that the weapons that these soldiers had were far superior to the muzzle loaders that he was used to fighting. Native Americans at this time had mostly just bow and arrow to fight with. Some of them had the muzzle loaders, but they are usually low on ammunition and powder, and so they relied mostly on their bow and arrows. So this is what sort of it looked like. Here's the wagons. The boxes were taken off the wagon wheels and set around in a circle, and after a while they could see that when you're fighting with bow and arrow, the wood, even flimsy wood, will stop an arrow very easily. And so these boxes look like pin cushions with all of the arrows in them. But at this time, the American government had had enough of this Bozeman Trail and the constant harassment from the natives. So they were willing to give it up. And so that in the Treaty of 1868, the U.S. government, probably for the first time and last time, gave up territory to the Indians. And they concede the Dakotas west of the Missouri River and north of the Platte River, including the Black Hills. The Black Hills, seen as just another Native American site, generally useless to white people. And so all of this territory was going to be in perpetuity. The land of the Indians, the Lakotas, would have this, and white people were not allowed on this land that was then conceded to them. What many of the natives did not understand about this treaty, however, was that it was anticipated by the U.S. government that the buffalo would soon be wiped out. At this time, the railroads would go into the plains, and hunters, buffalo hunters, would come out and wipe out thousands, tens of thousands of buffalo, because the buffalo hides were becoming very lucrative and valuable. And so it was known that before too long the buffalo would no longer be on the plains. They may be extinct. And so the Native Americans were not going to have their livelihood there anymore. And so they were to become farmers. They were to become civilized in the white people's sense. And so they would not be warriors of the plains anymore. So this is the Treaty of 1868. This is the vast territory that the Lakota Sioux and the Northern Cheyenne were to enjoy. And of course, right in this area, the Black Hills of South Dakota. Now, round about this time, we have our tragic love story from Crazy Horse. He met Black Buffalo Woman, who was one of the most desirable of women from a good family. Now this comes as a surprise to many people who are somewhat unfamiliar with Lakota Sioux or Native American history in general. You would not think that in the Native American traditions and culture that there are good families, the better sort. There are the middling type families, and then there are the lousy, less respected families amongst the natives. But yes, that exists in the Native American tradition as well. So Black Buffalo Woman came from a very prominent family. She was related to Red Cloud, who was a very well-known leader. And so she was very desirable. Many, many Indian braves sought her hand in marriage, and as well as Crazy Horse. One of the ways that you court a desirable young woman is you get a big buffalo robe and you sit together underneath it. As I said before, Native Americans are generally, even though they live out on the Great Plains, they're very communal. You do not go off by yourself very often. And so when you court a woman, it's in the midst of your village. And so you sit with her underneath this buffalo robe and you talk. That's the only privacy that you get. And so Crazy Horse had his chance. He talked with her, fell in love with her, but so did many other young, brave natives. And eventually, the marriage that was kind of arranged, and people differ on this, whether it was really her choice or not, but she married a man named No Water. Why that was his name, I do not know. There's many fascinating names of these Native Americans, but anyway, she married No Water, but Crazy Horse was still madly in love with her. For years and years, he would show attentions towards her and go and visit her, even though she eventually had 3 kids with No Water, but Crazy Horse was still in love with her and eventually convinced her to run away with him. Now, I was looking online to see if there was any photographs of Black Buffalo Woman. This came up, but this is probably not her. I don't know, but some will say we don't really know what happened to Black Buffalo Woman in her later years. But anyway, for our purposes, she's going to represent Black Buffalo Woman. So, Crazy Horse runs away with Black Buffalo Woman. I've heard it said that within Native American tribes, you will almost never find an instance of a Native American stealing from another Native American in the tribe. Theft is almost entirely unknown, except when it comes to women. That was the one commodity that men would steal within their own tribe. But in another sense, it was not theft, since she went along willingly. And the controversy then is, well, do you allow a woman to make her own choice? In the Native American Lakotas, women are supposed to be allowed to choose their own husbands and not be forced into a marriage. And if she's in a marriage and she chooses to leave her husband or kick her husband out, that was perfectly acceptable. And there are many instances in which a woman would kick her husband out of the teepee, throw his stuff out, and that was not to be denied her. So anyway, No Water was not going to take this lying down. He was very angry. He was chased down the two. He entered the teepee with a borrowed pistol. He shot Crazy Horse in the face, hit him right below and to the side of his nose. He assumed at that point that he had killed Crazy Horse. He left, took off, and told everybody, "I've just killed Crazy Horse." Black Buffalo Woman, very frightened at first, eventually was talked into coming back to No Water. But Crazy Horse, to everyone's surprise, did not die. He actually, when No Water entered the teepee, he had stood up, was shot in the face, and he fell right into the campfire, in addition to being shot in the face. Fortunately, there were others right there, took care of him, and it took several months, of course. He lost the upper part of his jaw and had a severe scar on the left side of his face for the rest of his life, but he survived. And so at that point, everybody was very upset, thinking that there's now going to be a tribal feud. There's going to be Lakota versus Lakota, and people are going to die because Crazy Horse had a following, people who loved him and his own family and others, and No Water had a following as well. So the elders of the tribe got together and said, "We need to fix this. We do not want a feud with Lakotas killing other Lakotas." So they came up with a plan in which No Water was to give Crazy Horse some horses. Now, some people will say it's 2 horses, some people say it's 3 horses, but you get the idea. He gave him some horses. And these were very fine horses. And this was to settle the argument. Black Buffalo Woman was to go back with No Water, and Crazy Horse was to get these horses, and this was to settle it. And by and large it did. Crazy Horse was still very angry, and there was another incident sometime later. They were supposed to be kept apart. No Water with Black Buffalo Woman was to live very far away, as far as he could, from Crazy Horse. But they ran into each other some years later. Crazy Horse saw that he was near No Water, hopped on his horse and chased after him. No Water saw Crazy Horse coming and took off. Crazy Horse was intent on killing No Water, despite the settlement that was made. Fortunately for the peace of the Lakotas, No Water escaped and was not harmed. Anyway, so the tribal feud was averted, but Crazy Horse could no longer be a shirt wearer. He had violated one of the most important tenets of shirt wearers, and that is to be appropriate at all times, never to cause discord within the tribe. And he did. And so he lost the shirt, and at this time, the whole institution of the shirt wearers was coming into disrepute because of some of the problems within the Lakota tribe. And so no one was chosen to take the place of Crazy Horse. As all Great Plains tribes do. If you are a warrior in any particular tribe, you know that you are going to lose your loved ones, your family members, your friends from childhood. And this is an example of a couple of losses that Crazy Horse sustained. Buffalo Hump, who was a childhood friend, who went through many adventures together with Crazy Horse, many raids and battles, was killed in a raid against the Shoshones. And this was very difficult to face for Crazy Horse. And then right about the time of the Black Buffalo Woman incident, after it was settled, he learned that his younger brother, Little Hawk, had been on a raid against the Shoshones, but on the way home, he came across some miners, some white miners who were well armed. They tried to take them, and Little Hawk was shot and killed by one of the miners. Also at this time, in the late 1860s, early 1870s, a growing division among the Lakotas. More and more of them were were enticed by the white man's goods. Fort Laramie out on the plains became someplace that a Native American could go and get all the goodies that the white man produced. And so a large gathering outside the fort, they were called Laramie loafers, both by the whites and by their fellow Lakotas. Red Cloud, one of the most famous of the tribe, went to visit President Grant and was so impressed by the great cities of the white people, the huge buildings that they could construct, the vast numbers of whites that he could not have imagined ever existed. And meeting President Grant and coming back home, he realized there's no hope for defeating the white man. And so at that point, he gave up fighting and decided that the people, his people, needed to make some sort of agreement, and the best that they could. And so an agency was set up for Red Cloud along with the reservation. And at the time, there was a lot of territory that went with it, but he promised no longer to fight against the white soldiers. And but Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull were now the leaders of the resistance. They were not going to go quietly. And here's the Laramie loafers. There's Fort Laramie there in the background, and whole tribes of Indians surrounding the fort, being dependent now on the white man's goods and food. And then gold was discovered. The story is told over and over again. Indian lands that were given in perpetuity for them to keep as long as the grass grows, or until gold is discovered. And in this case, the gold was discovered, and there was no holding back the thousands of miners who went to seek out their fortune. So again, the government has a choice. We know that we can't stop these miners. There's far too many of them. The territory is far too large. So we have to make a deal. We have to buy the Black Hills from the Lakotas. And yeah, I know we said it was going to be yours forever, but we got to do this because we cannot stop the miners. Now, so when it came right down to it, you had, again, the division. You have Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse saying, no, this is our land. You said it was our land. We are not going to give it up. And then the others who realistically knew that they were going to lose that land. And the best thing that we can do is get the best deal that we can out of it. So eventually, there's the Black Hills Conference 1875, and the deal was made with some, and others just went away angry. And at that point, the U.S. government says now all Indians must live on reservations. You cannot go off on your own and just hunt out in the plains. We want everybody to come in, and we will enforce it. One of the great tragedies, this is almost like a Shakespearean tragedy that this all led up to, that none of the great battles after this point really needed to happen. The Native Americans were no longer going to be able to sustain themselves on the plains, and everybody knew that. There was no point in sending soldiers out to bring them in, to fight and kill them. It was just not needed, and they should have realized that, but they did not. They knew that there was Indians out on the plains, and they did not like the idea that these Indians were free to roam about and harass white people out there. So there were soldiers sent to bring them in or to just kill them. So the last great gathering, the summer of 1876, you have the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne gather along the Little Bighorn River. It's disputed out how many there were, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 to 10,000 of these Native Americans were there. And for them, it was, generally speaking, an annual thing for them to get together in a very large group, almost like a very large family get-together, a reunion of sorts, where people would see old friends and relatives and have a very enjoyable time together. Now, I talked about the division between the Laramie loafers and the Indians who would not join them. It was not a sharp division. There were many of the so-called Laramie loafers who would come and stay for a little while and then go back with their more free Lakota family out on the plains. And similarly, there would be some who would side with the ones out on the plains, who would come in and get some of the goodies at the fort and then travel back. So it was not a sharp division, but it was a real division. But anyway, so in this last great gathering, many from Fort Laramie came to spend time with their friends and relatives and enjoy this last gathering of the Lakota and the Cheyenne. They knew that there may be soldiers out there wanting them to come in and maybe attacking. But in this large gathering, they felt invulnerable. Surely no group of soldiers, however large, would attack 7,000 to 10,000 of us like this in this encampment. We are invulnerable. There's no way that they would attack. Now, everybody is familiar somewhat with the Battle of Little Bighorn. What most people don't know is that there was a battle before Little Bighorn, just a few days before. On June 17th, General Crook, with 1,000 men, were coming to help round up the Indians and bring them into the reservations. And he also had many Crow and Shoshone scouts with him. One of the things that going back to one of the books that I had that talked about, and this was D. Brown's book, Barry Marhardy, Wounded Knee. He refers to the Crow and Shoshone scouts as mercenaries. And I thought that was very unfair. The Crow and Shoshone had very good reason to fight against the Lakotas. And the Lakotas, in one sense, I think is rather disingenuous to be upset about the loss of their lands when the lands that they had were taken from the Crow and Shoshone. So it's almost as if we're outraged that you're stealing the land that we stole from somebody else. And that's kind of what it amounted to. But in any case, the Crow and Shoshone scouts that were with the American soldiers had a very legitimate reason to fight against the Lakotas. They had stolen their lands. They had killed their people. They had taken horses by the hundreds and thousands. But on this morning, June 17th, as General Crook and his 1,000 soldiers are approaching, scouts had seen them coming. And so there was a debate amongst the Lakotas and Cheyennes. What are we going to do? Some of them said, well, look, they're probably just coming to help round us up and send us in. Surely they're not going to attack us. And then there was the other side that said, they are going to attack us and we need to attack first. And so that's what prevailed. And so Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull with probably 1,500 to 2,000 warriors come out and attack first in kind of a surprise attack. The Americans were certainly not expecting this, and it was a great battle. Even though few people actually died, it was an amazingly well-fought battle from the viewpoint of the Lakotas and Cheyenne. Crazy Horse had been working with his soldiers to discipline them, to focus them, to make sure that they are fighting in concert, that they could be working together instead of working to make a name for themselves individually. And so they fought very hard for several hours throughout the day, and it was something of a stalemate. But just because of that, it was more of a victory for the Lakotas and Cheyenne, because it stopped General Crook. He was beaten badly and decided that he could not go any further. So even though he claimed victory, because at the end of the day, the natives went back to their camp. And so he said, I hold the field, therefore I won the battle. But I'm done. I'm not going to fight anymore. I have to go back and regroup. So in that sense, it was clearly a victory for the Lakota. So this is the Battle of the Rosebud, in which very few, as I said, very few were killed or wounded, but it was a good battle nonetheless. So General Crook, of course, did not know that there was another group of soldiers coming to attack, and that was, as we all know, General Custer. I'm not going to get into all of the details of this great battle. I'll talk more about it next week when I talk about General Custer. But Custer arrives on June 25th, splits his force into 4 parts. One of the great, most foolish things he's ever done, and attacks. One group under Reno attacked first. He's driven back. Crazy Horse, in the midst of this, there's a lot of confusion, and I'll talk more about this next week. There's a lot of confusion as to what exactly happened, and we will never know exactly how this all played out. But we know that Reno attacked first, Crazy Horse and another great warrior named Gaul helped repulse Reno. Reno goes back and regroups after several of his soldiers are killed. And then they go after Custer, who comes around from the side. Custer starts to attack. He's driven back. He's going uphill. And that is where he's cut to pieces by both Gaul and Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse, it is said, outflanked him as he's going up the hill to regroup and try to hold his command together. That was the one thing that Custer, if he did, may have survived, but he could not, largely due to, most likely I should say, Crazy Horse running his soldiers, or his warriors, into the midst of this retreating group of soldiers, breaking them apart into smaller groups. They could never regroup again because of Crazy Horse. And so they were taken apart piecemeal and all wiped out. 210 men under Custer's command. So this is the terrain of, this is the Little Bighorn River right here. The encampments of the tribe were spread out all along here. And this is, so Reno attacks here, is driven back across. Reno regroups and holds his small force together, and they are not wiped out. Custer, probably 3.5 miles down creek, starts to attack here, is repulsed, and cannot get his soldiers together. They are destroyed piecemeal in this area here. So we have the soldiers. Here's Custer comes down the Rosebud to the Little Bighorn. Crook is here. He's defeated or fought first, and then they are Custer's command is wiped out here. The great irony, as I said, and the great tragedy is that none of this needed to happen. The Native Americans were not going to last very much longer out on the plains. They had to come into the reservations. So after this, the winter of 1876 into 1877 was a very harsh one. There's very little game out on the plains for Crazy Horse and the other Lakotas. And so they gradually start coming into the reservations. Crazy Horse, one of the last holdouts, did not want to come in. Many messages were sent out to him that you will be treated fairly. We will give food and shelter to your people. At one time, Crazy Horse decides, well, I guess I must come in. And unfortunately, as he's coming in, there are Crow scouts who see him as he approaches the fort. And the Crows, of course, as I said, did not like the Lakotas at all. They saw them coming and attacked and killed a few of them. And then Crazy Horse says, well, if I'm trying to come in and you're killing me, how is that even going to work? So he takes off again. And finally, they send more messages out apologizing for this terrible blunder. And eventually he does come in because he has no choice. His followers, 900 strong, will eventually starve to death, and he knows it. So they come in, and once he does come in, he finds it very difficult to live in this agency on this reservation because of all the jealousies and rumors that are being spread about him, both by whites and by other Lakotas. There's great jealousies because he is now the focus of everybody's attention. Everybody looks to him as the great warrior, and many of the other chiefs of the Lakotas didn't like that and were having a hard time with it. And rumors start to spread that he's going to take control, or the white people are going to make him the chief of all the Lakotas. And so it was very difficult for Crazy Horse, who really just wanted to live, just wanted to help his people. He did not. He never aspired, by the way, to be a chief. He became a chief by default because he got so much attention as a great man that people followed him. He was told that he should go see the president, as many of the other great chiefs had, to impress him as to the futility of fighting against white people, and he didn't want to do it. He said, "You promised me that I could go on a hunt. If you let me go on a hunt, then maybe I'll want to go see the president." And that never worked out. This is about the same time that the Nez Perce Indians started going on the warpath and trying to escape up to Canada. And they told him, "Now we need you to help us fight the Nez Perce." And he really did not want to do that, but said that, "Yes, okay, I will, and I'll fight them if you need me to." And then that didn't work out. And as I said before, many of the chiefs were very jealous of Crazy Horse's, the attention that he was getting from so many sides. And the rumors were spreading. What's he going to do? What are the white people going to do with him? Are they going to make him, give him all of the power that we now have? So he was, and there's many conspiracy ideas out there. And so finally, he was going to be arrested. This troublemaker needed to be dealt with. So they sent Indian agents to arrest him. Well, he saw it coming, and so he took off to go to his uncle's agency 40 miles away, the Spotted Tail Agency. And interesting thing about Crazy Horse, he had a few tricks up his sleeve that even some of his Lakota Native American tribe did not know about. As he was escaping, he rode his horse as hard as he could. When he came to a hill, he got off the horse and he walked it up the hill. Going down the hill, he'd ride it down. And he outran all of the others, the Lakotas chasing him, because he knew how to take care of his horse along the way. But it was inevitable that he had to come back. Spotted Tail, his uncle, said, "At first, I will allow you to stay here, but you need to follow my rules." And Crazy Horse said, "That's fine, I'm okay." But the pressure was mounting, and he had to go back. He traveled back 40 miles to Fort Robinson, and there were hundreds who followed with him. Both supporters and detractors were there with him to make sure that he did not take off again. When he arrived, there were a group of Native American enforcers, police, who were going to take him into prison, the prison on the fort. As soon as he saw what was happening, he resisted. He was going to try to run away again. And in the midst of the melee, he was stabbed by a bayonet by one of the guards. This was actually a white guard who stabbed him. And he died some hours later. And so, very sad ending that just did not need to happen. But in the times, bringing these Plains Indians onto reservations, it was just bound to cause problems that nobody anticipated, and great tragedy. And here is what the great monument is supposed to look like when it's finished.
Any idea how old he was when he
So he was 40 or 41 when he was born. So this was 77 when he was killed. So you can do the math there. Still fairly young, 35, 36. Any questions? Yes? Do you have? Oh. Yes?
Did the Indians not do well because the white men had killed all of their buffalo?
So the Indians knew, and the white people knew, that once you wipe out the buffalo, they had to come onto the reservations because they were now going to be dependent on white people's food. And the plan was to make them farmers. And so a lot of farm implements were given to the Native Americans on these reservations. Say, now you're on the reservation, now you're going to become civilized, no more warriors, and you're going to grow crops and survive off of the crops that you grow. That was the plan. And of course, it did not go well. The culture, of course, was women do the farming, men do the hunting. So what farming was done on the Great Plains was small scale, but it was done by the women, not the men. And so that's just another problem that needed to be worked out. And so for years, I mean, there's a whole horrible history of Native Americans on the reservations being given rancid food, the cheating and graft and corruption involved in the supply chain for the Native American reservations is a very, very sad, tragic tale in and of itself. So,
If we had not killed all those buffaloes, do you think the Indians might have resisted more strenuously?
oh, certainly, certainly. But the thing is, killing the buffalo was also essential for people to settle out there, because you cannot have 1 million buffalo running over your farmland or even across the railroad tracks. They would just destroy them in their normal course of migrating up and down the plains. So the buffalo had to be eliminated for civilization to come to the Great Plains. There's no two ways about it. And so the two were intertwined as essential to be gotten rid of. So, yes?
Sorry, I have to go.
Yeah.
I read a book once on wolf behavior of wolf packs, and it's absolutely fascinating how identical it is to human tribal behavior. And you see it all over the world. Scottish clans, they behave exactly the same as wolfpack does.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just tribal
right.
people here,
Sure.
it's everywhere.
Right.
It's just fascinating.
It is. It is. And I've seen a little bit of that sort of thing myself. And it's fascinating to see that wolves all have their individual personalities, and how they interact with the pack is really fascinating.
My pack, my tribe, my
Right.
place.
Right.
You're an enemy because you're not one of us.
Exactly.
It's just amazing.
Okay, so next week, General Custer, another fascinating character.